So we've talked a lot about how Germany's familiar old world seems to be falling apart around it, with Russia waging war, the US going full-on nationalist, China seeking economic domination, and Europe slipping into populism. So no wonder the government here in Berlin is desperately looking around the world for new friends and new opportunities to try to spin up a more positive story. Well, that's why Friedrich Merz was just in India for his first trip to Asia since taking office, with lots of good vibes and lots of announcements and a big business delegation in tow. Now, there's long been a sense that the Germany-India relationship has been a bit of a damp squib. So in this edition of Berlin Briefing, we're going to ask, this time, is it for real? And we have full-on Team DW here. We have Michaela Küfner here in the studio, as well as Biresh Banerjee. And across in Delhi, we have Sandra Petersmann, our bureau chief there. So great to have you all on board. I want to split this up. I think, first of all, we're going to talk about the vibes. Then we're going to get on to the business and the defense. And then finally, we're going to pose that question, is this for real? But first of all, vibes. I think, Michaela, you are definitely the best person to kick off this conversation, because you were traveling with Merz, you were on the plane, you often do this, you go on these trips with Merz a lot. But this trip definitely had more vibes than the average one for a German delegation.
Well, a lot of business and defense vibes, a large delegation of CEOs. And of course, there's always the wow factor when any German leader travels to India. I also was there with Angela Merkel, and she was really taken aback, first of all, by the magnitude of everything, but also the magnitude of the challenge. And it was back then also Narendra Modi he faces personally. It's 1.4 billion people. It's just a different scale. So you have here the leader of the third largest economy in the world realizing, yes, it's a large economy in terms of revenue and everything, but this really is a lot of people and a lot of photographs of yourself in the streets. There were thousands of photographs of Friedrich Merz. This is a courtesy by the Indian government.
Sort of placards around the streets, lining
everywhere.
the streets. Yeah.
And I had seen it before because it was similar with Angela Merkel, but I have seen so many images of Friedrich Merz as I've in one day alone as I've ever seen in my entire life. And I do cover the German
You assume
Chancellor.
he does have sufficient ego to cope with that, right?
He was fine in coping with that. At the same time, you do want to make sure that the photo you hand in for that particular occasion is one you're happy with. So yeah, and there was people lining the streets. Clearly, that is a dynamism that is also deliberate from the Indian side. I think a lot of it is cultural as well, and they did go to this kite festival, which of course was fantastic pictures, where you see then pictures, a kite with the images of the leaders concerned flying high in the sky, and people are greeting that. And to us, it's very intense to look at this kind of imagery and this kind of spiritual, enthusiastic take on what really is a very tough political conversation between two sides.
Was this the first time Merz was flying a kite?
I don't have sources for sure, but I know that his enthusiasm for kite flying is not documented at all. Let's leave it there.
And this was in Modi's hometown in Gujarat state. Yeah, so this was a particular kind of like recognition, a gesture that Modi could give to Merz. Yeah,
correct.
So,
I mean, this is not the first world leader to receive this honor, to fly down to Ahmedabad, Gujarat, his home state, where Narendra Modi was the chief minister, the main leader of the state for more than 10 years. That's where he really made his brand, Modi. But remember, Xi Jinping was there in 2014, and then what did you have 6 years later in 2020? A clash between Chinese and Indian troops in which lives were lost. You had other leaders who have also come to Ahmedabad, and I'm forgetting some of them. But
Trump famously
was
there
Trump,
just before the pandemic.
Trump was there. He was there before the pandemic. There was a huge event in one of the biggest cricket stadiums in the world. Yeah. And what do we have now? India paying 50% tariffs, the threat of secondary sanctions, and personal ridicule on very public platforms from President Trump for the Prime Minister of India. So
And Vladimir Putin just got a hug from Modi as well.
No, he was there in the same car as Modi in December last year when they drove back in the same car from the airport. But what I'm saying is that Ahmedabad is reserved for special guests. But just because you're in Ahmedabad doesn't mean that things will pan out all peachy. Although I'm hoping that the Indians believe that with Chancellor Merz it'll be slightly different.
Yeah, and Sandra, over there in Delhi, like, how are the vibes in terms of the kind of coverage and attention that this trip got, if you say, compared to other leaders?
There was certainly more coverage, especially leading up to the Merz visit on the day itself. At least in the second half of the day, there was a bit of a competition as well, because not only was Chancellor Merz and Prime Minister Modi doing kite diplomacy in Ahmedabad. At the same time, we saw the new US ambassador, Sergio Gore, who is also in extension the special envoy for South and Central Asia, taking office here in Delhi. So you could really see the electronic media switching from Ahmedabad over to Delhi, because Sergio Gore also came in with a presser announcing that India, of course, is a very, very important partner to the United States. So at least for the media, it was a bit of a competition, which of the two events to cover most. And if I had to break it down, I would say, especially towards the end of the day, perhaps Sergio Gore was slightly ahead of the Chancellor.
Let's quickly on the personalities of these two leaders. So Modi and Merz, from where you stand, how much potential do you see for these two personalities to click?
I mean, I think there is a lot of potential. And Narendra Modi, let's just put it this way. I think he's been looking for a win because he's been really facing a personal rubbing from his close friend, Donald Trump. Whereas that friendship disappeared, what happened to those events that happened in Gujarat? So he's been looking for a win. And India in general, not just Narendra Modi, is also looking to the West, particularly Europe, given what's happening in the world. And to have some sort of a personal chemistry with the leader of the biggest economy in Europe is something that works as a win for Narendra Modi at a personal level, and also for India in general. And we can talk about that and expand it to the rest of Europe. But this is something of a win. Why? Because in the latter half of last year, you've had this personal chemistry with Donald Trump virtually crumble. You've had Narendra Modi photographed between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, personal ties with Vladimir Putin, and that hasn't really gone down fantastically in the West, which India is trying to court. So here, to have a European leader come down and to have the opportunity to actually make some sort of personal friendship, personal chemistry is something that the Indians were really looking for. And I think this would go down as a win.
Michaela, did you get any sense from Merz or his people about if there's chemistry between the two leaders?
Well, you know, it always gets stressed how great leaders get on with each other. I think they're very two different characters. But the big win, of course, was also the sequencing. It was Friedrich Merz's first visit to Asia. He did not go to China or Japan first. He did go to India. So that is a win for Modi. And the German side, my sense is very aware that being squeezed by the US and China, the political currency that Europe has, that Germany has, is falling in value. And Merz was putting some chips on the table there to ensure that the power and also the economic power that he represents can further a much needed new alliance with India. It's not completely new, of course, but I got the sense that there was a feeling that this is something that can compensate to some degree economically, but also in terms of the political global dynamics. And let's not forget, India is also a nuclear power, so it will not so easily fall into some kind of historical crack as Ukraine did, for instance. And it is an emerging power with much needed skilled labor. It has so much market potential as well. And there's still a long way to go, really, for both sides to open the doors and build those channels economically, but also politically, because India has also very much been its own in these relations.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the economics and the business side of this. So, Sandra, let's come to you first because, Merz was visiting Germany with this big business delegation. There's talk of trade deals with Europe and so on. But first of all, just from India's point of view, like what does India need from Germany in terms of business, in terms of economic development?
Well, it needs market access, better market access to Germany, to the European Union on the one side. Then, of course, India is always wanting, when it comes to direct investment, more of that, more engagement from the German side. Technology transfer is obviously a huge thing for India. So if you produce in India, please come and let us be part of it. Joint production is a key word here because that exactly comes with technology transfer. Then both sides are seeking a diversification of supply chains, getting rid of over-dependencies on one source only, and that's also where the two of them come together. There is a very
and that source
young,
very often
skilled
being China, yeah? So...
Yeah, for both sides, actually, China, right? And on India's side, Russia as well. But we get to that later when we perhaps talk defense more in detail. And India, of course, has a very young population, a very skilled population, at least in parts. And there are not enough jobs here. So skilled labor migration from India to Germany was also high on the agenda for both sides. And in fact, one of the deliverables at the end was a declaration signed to basically make this easier and to send more people from India to Germany, especially in the healthcare sector, where Germany has a critical shortage. And that's a win-win in the end for both sides.
Yeah. So, let's get the other side of the coin. So you've mentioned a couple of these things, but kind of like, what are the big gains that the Germans are looking for in India?
Yeah, it's really interesting that Sandra was mentioning market access because that argument goes both ways.
Yeah.
I spoke to CEOs who complain that market access is a huge problem, getting into India and really making investments there where they then have the guarantee that they will get enough market access to make it viable. Technology transfer is an issue, particularly in the manufacturing of machinery, but at the same time, a lot of high-tech development is happening in Bangalore itself, really at incredible scale. And there is a direct link, of course, with Silicon Valley. They very much have the self-confidence there as well to say, look, we have a cooperation with Silicon Valley. It's not a one-way street. So you see a very self-confident startup mentality there as well, with highly skilled labor. And of course, the issue of health workers, just as an illustration, it was some 25,000 a couple of years ago. At the moment, there's already 170,000 particularly skilled health workers working in Germany from India. Germany needs a lot more. Indians make up with 60,000 students, the largest proportion of foreign students in Germany already. And you learn a lot of things on these trips. The whole issue of trade barriers. There are parts in machinery used to produce certain fabrics that are dual-use goods. So a lot of this whole question of technology transfer or selling machines to India, things get stuck when you get into the details, that then all of a sudden you can't send spare parts because there's an issue that they could be dual use. And the same, of course, and it's the opposite issue when you talk about submarines, where all of a sudden you find that there's an issue also about a ban on sending certain parts once you've already sold submarines to India, for instance. And this big deal now that we expect to get signed by the end of March, potentially, on 6 submarines, it's worth some 8 billion euros. Here, the Indians want guarantees that nothing will get stuck like it has done in the past. And there seems to be a really new willingness of the German government to ensure that there are no more such tricky barriers that prevent German industry from actually manufacturing and expanding into India. But also the issue of investment from India to Germany is an issue, speaking to CEOs who then told me that the Indians are saying, listen, you in Germany, you really need to be working more.
Yeah.
The whole issue of labor laws in Germany is something that is hampering investment from India to Germany. And that's a really interesting and very unusually confrontational message that the CEOs were taking home.
So let's dig in a bit now into this EU India trade deal that has been in negotiations for a very long time, that is aimed at fixing at least some of these problems. Friedrich Merz had a soundbite on that. I think we can play that. Let's just listen to that.
India also has experience with American tariffs policy. With Europe, India can have a different experience, a better experience. We now agree on open trade relations with each other. We're not using tariffs as political instruments. Rather, we want to reduce tariffs so that trade between our two continents improves. We're on our way to achieving this.
So, I mean, this trade deal has been in negotiations really for a very long time. We're talking
17 years. I think.
Yeah. So it's not just something that's been cooked up recently. And there have been difficulties on both sides. So, Biresh, first of all, from the Indian side, what's the difficulty that India has had with this deal, or just sometimes does have more broadly with trade deals?
Particularly when it comes to agricultural products. For example, the European Union is looking for a market for European cheeses, for example, and dairy products, and trying to allow access into the Indian market on this is something that is a political hot potato. Anything to do with farming of agricultural products, much like in Europe, is a hot potato in India. For the Indians, a lot of the problem has also been to do with this carbon tax that the European Union has, in which you basically tax the imports coming from another country based on how much the carbon footprint that was involved in creating that product. So basically that would see Indian exporters having to pay a tax over and above what it is that they're trying to export to the European Union. So that has been a stumbling block. There is also the question of standards. There is also the question of protection of intellectual property. That is a huge concern for European companies that want to come into India. Are intellectual protection laws, intellectual property protection laws strong enough in India to warrant things like technology transfer, things like joint production, setting up local factories in India? So those are some of the things that have been there as stumbling blocks. But I think it just also must be said, there has been a lot of movement from both sides. The Indian Commerce Minister was in Brussels very recently trying to talk about this. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa are both chief guests to India's Republic Day parade for the 26th of January. And I think that is a notional deadline that people have at the moment that, okay, maybe this deal gets over the finish line by the 26th of January. And I remember we were discussing this last year, and I think last year the deadline was the end of last year. So that deadline was crossed. Now we are at the 26th of January. Let's see.
And of course, Biresh and you, Sandra, and I spoke about this back in September, where we had an earlier episode on India-Germany relations. Sandra, what's the latest? So you mentioned agriculture there. The understanding is that this has been largely kind of carved out. Like, what's the latest signals you're getting from the Indian side about whether this really is within reach now?
Well, some officials came out with the news that 20 out of 24 chapters are closed. So that leaves us with 4. And of course, 4 will be sticking point. It's really crunch time. I think what I took away from the visit was that both Modi and Merz are absolutely in favor of meeting the deadline, of getting that deal signed. And sticking points from the Indian side, like Biresh mentioned, cars and steel. Steel, for all the reasons that Biresh mentioned, it's the carbon tax, it's the carbon footprint. Would it make Indian steel a lot more expensive? Labor laws, which are perhaps on the Indian side not in line with European standards. And the steel industry here in India employs hundreds of thousands of people. So there is employment at stake here. And cars, same thing. Obviously, there is the fear if you allow an abundance of European cars flooding the Indian market, which is a hungry market, what would that do to local production here, right? So there are uncertainties on both sides. And I think steel and cars, from what I hear, are the crucial sticking points that needs to be solved. And it's not too far away that January 27th, no, first celebration on the 26th, and then 27th would be signing date. Perhaps what we might be looking at the end is something like a comprehensive framework agreement, which is perhaps compartmentalized into something like a living document and leaving some of the sticking points out. But I would suggest that both sides want something signed. They want a tangible, they want something to be delivered to the public also, because it makes a lot of sense in the kind of uncertain world with all the geopolitical upheaval that we are living in, sending that strategic signal, which it would be after all.
And Michaela, I mean, the Germans are clearly keen for this, and there's just been one of these kind of bigger, long-running trade deals has just been agreed, Mercosur, with some Latin American countries, but that was not unanimously agreed, and there was a huge amount of wrangling within the European Union about which countries would sign up to that and which wouldn't. So what's the feeling you're getting from the German side? They want these deals. Some countries in the European Union are kind of more putting on the brake pedal. Is this a source of some frustration to the Germans? They want to move faster than the EU can move.
There's a huge sense of frustration on the German side, particularly actually with France, which voted against that Mercosur agreement with Latin American states, where agriculture was the major sticking point. This is not the case so much in the direction of Europe this time around, because India doesn't produce agricultural goods in such an industrial large-scale fashion to a large degree as Germany does, or Europe as a whole does. So that wasn't such a huge issue. It was more an issue for the Indian side. But actually, it was almost too good to be true to have such positive signals from India. That would be like two major wins after Mercosur within a week, after in one case, more than 2 decades of negotiation. But the Germans want to go ahead, and there's a growing sense that, and we saw it with this majority vote. It was the first time in history on Mercosur that this happened in the EU.
So not having a whole unanimity within the EU, but just a majority.
Just having a majority of states agreeing to it, and the others having to deal with it.
Yeah.
That was a historic first, and there is a momentum that Germany, as an economy that relies so heavily on exports, is willing to go it potentially to some degree alone with other countries, if it legally can within the European Union. But this really is something that Friedrich Merz needs to resolve. And that's also why cars is such a major pressure point for the Germans. German prosperity relies to a large degree on how well the German car industry is doing. And it's not doing very well in China. It's not doing so great in the US with those tariffs slapped onto German cars. A lot, of course, being produced in the US. I think it's always a fun fact to learn that BMW is the biggest car exporter of the United States. So these are the issues that were on the table, and that's also why there is such huge interest to get this resolved by this date, to be able to celebrate this and to also demonstrate both to the United States and to China, look, there are alternatives.
Yeah. Let's get to defense. You touched on this submarine deal just earlier, Michaela. Let's dive into that a bit more. But first of all, let's hear a soundbite from...
Literally dive in.
Let's go under the surface.
So let's hear first from Narendra Modi. We have a soundbite from him talking about defense cooperation.
The growing cooperation in defense and security is a symbol of our mutual trust and shared vision. I express my heartfelt gratitude to Chancellor Merz for simplifying the priorities related to defence and trade. We will work on a roadmap to increase cooperation between defence industries, which will open up new opportunities for co-development and co-production.
So some of those kind of key words that we've already been talking about, kind of co-production, the importance of that. But you know, he talked about kind of trust there. And Biresh, let's start with you, because it's interesting. I mean, Germany has always had a very restrictive arms exports regime, and this has been to the frustration of the Indians for a long time. For instance, I remember one Indian diplomat complaining to me that Germany wouldn't sell handguns to India because of concern about how they might be used in Kashmir. I mean, how much did that overshadow the German-Indian relationship? This sense that Germany didn't really trust India with its weapons.
I mean, just to be just at the outset, there already is a defense relationship between Germany and India. India already operates 4 HDW submarines that were made in the 80s locally. Some of them, at least, were made locally in India. For India, trust is a huge issue because that really is the operative word here. Because they thought they had trust, for example, with the Americans. Look at where that relationship is right now, and trust is something they've had with the Russians as well, right? Whether people criticize India for it or not, the fact remains that during the Cold War, during the time of the Soviet Union and then Russia, Russian weapons were always available to India. Yes, there was hard negotiating, especially over the aircraft carrier, for example, that India operates. But it was going to be there at the end, and there was going to be technology transfer for most of this defense production. So what India is looking for is trust and a reliability over a long term, because things like submarines you don't make in a week. You set up a supply line, you set up a production line, and then you want that to keep functioning and you want that to keep running. So for example, there is already submarine production lines in India, and if this deal goes through with Germany, you are looking at potentially 2 parallel production lines for submarines running in India. So India would like to keep maintaining that, and therefore trust has to be there in terms of, okay, you will give us the weapons that we need, and there is going to be full technology transfer so that we can jointly work on something and maybe even market it to somebody else, the way India is doing with the BrahMos missile, for example.
And Sandra, I mean, there in Delhi, do you feel from people you talk to that they feel that there is a kind of a level of breakthrough now with the Germans on this whole area?
That is the sense that I get when I speak to diplomats from various European countries as well as diplomats on the Indian side here. I think what is important for India, like Biresh said, India doesn't want to be seen as the buyer only. India wants to be seen as the partner. Like Modi said, co-development, co-production. Those two have to go in sync to make this work, to make it reliable. And in this uncertainty that both India and Germany find themselves in, India is really looking almost for that third option, a reliable option, a trusted option that can deliver long-term, like Biresh said, but, and here comes the but, without firmly aligning to one particular camp, because India will, even if Germany has emerged as such a strong partner, or the EU might do so when they sign that bilateral trade agreement, it doesn't mean that India is firmly in any camp. They guard their strategic autonomy. They will continue to do so. They cannot afford to break with the United States. They cannot afford to break with Russia. But Europe has emerged as a third option. Germany, as somebody told me, India's strongest voice within the European Union, has emerged as a reliable, trusted partner for India. And that is how they want to play it, continuing that balancing tightrope dance, but with that third option, which in the Indian reading gives them perhaps more leverage on other fronts as well.
And Michaela, just before we kind of get to our wrap section here, but I mean, this deal has also been quite a while in the making, and there was speculation whether it would get announced on this trip. It wasn't, is it within reach? What were you hearing in the delegation there?
It's definitely within reach. It seems to be more weeks rather than months for this deal to go through. But it's, of course, also against the backdrop of the knowledge that India will remain independent. About a third of its defense goods come from Russia. That means they need to continue that relationship as well, because you need spare parts. You need to, keep certain equipment running. And then there was a huge frustration from the past experience with Germany that parts wouldn't come. They just wouldn't be delivered. And now these submarines are due to be produced in India. So that's a big win for the Indian side. It also is for the German side, because there was a whole question of capacity. It's not a small order, 6 submarines. That's years of manufacturing. They can manufacture about 1.5 per year at the current capacity of ThyssenKrupp. So and their order books are full. So this is a win-win scenario. But But what I've been hearing is that the Indian side wants guarantees that there won't be any hiccups in the future, that this is going to be smooth. And clearly there is a growing self-confidence that if they're going to put so much money on the table, there needs to be a sustainable win also for Indian society, for technology transfer, for know-how transfer, and for building that kind of infrastructure that can then be used otherwise also in the future. But my understanding is that this is really clearly within reach.
Yeah. So let's kind of return to our opening question finally of whether this is for real now. Yeah, the sense that the German-India relationship has always kind of underperformed. We've heard about, this building of trust, but in a rather ambiguous way, that you have to be able to, the two sides have to be able to trust each other, but not actually be fully in line with each other. And for the Germans, they can struggle with that, thinking, how do we trust a country that is so friendly with a country that is trying to attack Europe on a daily basis in the war in Ukraine? Biresh, first of all, do you feel that there's a sense of this has been effectively compartmentalized now, that you can say, okay, we put that into a compartment which we're not going to talk about for a while, and we focus on what we can deal with?
I think I'd like to quote the Indian foreign minister who had said I think it was in 2024 at one of these forums, that India is non-West, it's not anti-West. Yeah. India would like nothing more than to have these relationships with the West, but the West needs to understand that the Russian relationship is a longer one. It has withstood the test of time, and it has been reliable. I get the sense that the West is beginning to understand that India is indeed not anti-West. And I can tell you, especially on defense production, having spoken to Indian Air Force pilots, for example, they would love nothing more than to have Western aircraft or Western weaponry to work with. But it's just always been this problem. I think it is getting slowly compartmentalized because both India and Germany are victims of this new world order that is emerging, because old alliances have been completely cast aside. What replaces them appears to be power and interest-based relationships. Yeah. And I think Germany and India would be well suited to moving on that track and compartmentalizing certain value-based aspects to one side and then looking at interest moving forward.
And the German Foreign Minister, Johann Wadephul, has said that he wants to emphasize Germany's interests over values, particularly a contrast with his predecessor, Annalena Baerbock, who was seen as very much a kind of a values-oriented foreign minister. Sandra, you're often kind of up against this, the kind of day-to-day of the diplomatic relations between India and Germany. Do you see that really kind of coming through more? We talked about this also in September, that Germany is embracing a kind of realism towards India, and the corollary is that it is stepping back from some of the criticism that it used to make over India, for instance, over minority rights.
One of the people that I regularly talk to very recently told me, it's so nice to see that Germany has stopped preaching to us. That sense that Germany is preaching to India, that was always something that really upset the Indians, almost saying like, who are you to preach to us? Look at your very own hypocrisy. Do you preach the values? Do you live the values that you preach? And so I think that change in tonality, that strategic realism that seems to have set in with Germany when it comes to India is appreciated. And also what went down very well was when Foreign Minister Wadephul, when he was here last September, said something, it's a line that stuck with a lot of people. When we see Asia, we see India. Mm-hmm. That went down very well, because I think for the Indians, it is important to realize that India is not just another country there. It is on eye level. It is seen as a rising global power. It is not just the tiny cousin somewhere, but that the main focus is on China only. And that is a clear change in German foreign policy, and that is also much appreciated here. So I think all of it combined, it really gives this relationship momentum, not just for Germany, India, but in extension also for India and the European Union. And once again, a lot of people here tell me that they really see Germany as a kind of advocate when it comes to India in the European Union. And they really appreciate that Germany seems to be pushing to get a deal done, perhaps even in time, which would make it January 27th. If not now, when then? I mean, the moment, if I may quote Ursula von der Leyen, when she was here in the first half of 2025, she used the term, the stars have aligned. Oh, yes, they have. Perhaps not for the reasons that we all expected, but stars have aligned, and the geopolitical moment seems to be there to forge new partnerships.
And Michaela, I want to ask you, because, I mean, not just looking at, we're looking at the kind of the leadership of the government, we're looking at Friedrich Merz, we're looking at the foreign minister who are kind of pushing this at the moment. But do you see a depth of political support and interest for building this relationship with India throughout the German political scene? And do you see that also, I mean, you've been traveling with these CEOs, is it deep with the CEOs? Because, I mean, a few years ago, I went on one of these kind of CEO trips in Asia, which was to Singapore. And it was already in this era of the need to diversify from China. But a lot of them say, essentially, we can't. China's still so important and India will never replace it. And it always felt a bit like a sort of a tag on, okay, maybe a bit of India, but really, don't try to drag us away from China. Time has passed since then. I mean, do you sense a depth of interest? Yes, we're up for this with India in German politics and German business.
You want a yes or no question, don't you? A yes or no answer. Well, clearly, I think it's interesting that Sandra quoted Vadif was saying, when we see Asia, we see India. But when we do trade with Asia, we do trade. The Germans and the Europeans do trade with China.
Yeah.
And that is a dependency that many CEOs also want to have a counterweight to, let's put it that way. And nobody's talking about an alternative to China. The numbers are simply too big. But there is a realization that the West also, as Biresh mentioned it, no longer exists as like a group, and that diversification is the name of the game. And almost it's a sense that of when Merz meets Modi can say to him, welcome to my world. That those dependencies are gone. That reliability you had in the West with the US, but also to a degree with China, which is looking for an alternative market and is discovering the EU as a market where it can dump a lot of goods. It can no longer sell in the US. So there's a lot of pressure to have a constructive relationship. And the new currency is reliability. Whoever you speak to in the business world, in Germany or in Europe, is, look, we just need to know what the next thing is going to be. With the United States, you simply don't know what the next thing is going to be. And to just stick with the car industry once again, in China, German cars simply aren't cool anymore. They have their own brands. So there is a huge need for diversification. That's why it's so hugely interesting what they're going to do on that particular car aspect in this trade deal.
I just want to bring in terms of the political scene here in Germany, I just want to bring in a tweet from the head of the AfD. I don't know if you also saw that.
I saw that, and I was wondering if you could bring it up.
So Alice Weidel. So this is the co-head of the AfD, and I'm just going to read this out for anyone listening. So she tweeted while Merz was during his kite diplomacy kind of visit with Modi. While at home, everything is going downhill. Bankruptcies are hitting new highs, and more people are worried about their jobs. Merz is on a sightseeing tour in India, which, by the way, gets €1 billion in climate development money every year. So Alice Weidel from the far-right AfD party essentially dismissing this whole trip as a bit of fun for Merz. Biresh, what's your take on that?
I mean, I have so many questions on this, but I have one question that I just wanted to throw out there. Maybe it's for you, Michaela, because this is an election year in Germany. The 5 states are going to the polls, Berlin, 2 in the east of the country where the AfD is particularly strong. The prognosis is it'll do quite well. What does that mean for the political environment in Germany, given that the AfD is perhaps on the verge of a very good poll performance straight off the back of a national election last year where it came second in national polls. So if that is what a significant party, because there's no denying it's a significant party in Germany right now.
It's the largest opposition party.
It's the largest opposition party.
Leader of the opposition.
If that's what the co-leader of the opposition thinks Merz was doing in India, what does that say about, we were talking about reliability earlier, what if the political environment changes in Germany? I mean, India will be looking at this and going, do we have a problem on our hands? Is the coalition, the governing coalition at the moment, is it stable enough? Can it ride out this storm if it does become a storm?
Okay, well, that's a separate podcast. We're going to do that one.
I know.
Whether this coalition can ride out this storm. But just because Alice Weidel tweeted this or posted this on X doesn't mean that she really believes this. I really think there's a differentiation to be made here, because she's also portrayed herself in the past as this, with her business expertise, as being aware of what the German export industry needs. So this, to anyone who's spoken to Alice Weidel or followed her closely, looks like really taking a shot at pictures that did look to a certain degree like tourism. The whole kite, beautiful pictures, India in its full beauty, actually. But she knows that this is about business.
There was another tweet also, which just tweeted a photo of Merz and Modi sitting in the car together, saying, well, Merz obviously knows he's got his priorities right, which was meant ironically, as we can assume, so suggesting that Merz is in the wrong place. I think it was certainly an interesting intervention by Weidel. And
but
Sandra,
the reading
Sandra
is that this will work in the echo chambers of the AfD, that there's certain clientele, but anyone who actually works for a company that exports anything into the world, the Siemenses, the Mercedes-Benz, any big company in Germany knows it's an export industry. So that's the big question, how far this is going to take her.
Sandra.
From an Indian perspective, I got a lot of messages when the tweet came out from Indian colleagues, actually, who reached out to me and said, why is she saying this? What's the context? Who is she again? So I did try to explain a little bit. And then they asked me, but isn't this full-on racist? And why did they think so? Their reasoning was, so if a chancellor goes to India, it's for tourism only. Is that what India is all about? Are we not the fastest growing economy of the G20? So some people here, and at least those ones who reached out to me, agreed on that it does hinge on a little bit of a racist note, or at least a very firm cliche that India is tourism, but not very much else. I just thought I should throw it in there for the discussion of perceptions of tweets.
So let's wrap this up. I want to throw one question to all of you to wrap this up. So is this for real question? So if we're looking back in a year's time, what is the one thing that if it's happened by then, you think, okay, this is for real? Biresh.
Submarine deal. Especially when it comes to India-Germany ties. In the wider context, of course, the European FTA, but the submarine deal is, I think, intrinsic to determining whether this relationship is going to be reliable in the long term and how committed Germany is to this. Because let's not forget, I mean, submarines are an important part of the security of any nation. India is in a troublesome neighborhood, as Indian diplomats like to call it. And if this submarine deal now India has always been for quite some time. And if this submarine deal really goes through with full technology transfer, that's going to be something that's going to be really unique.
Sandra.
Submarine deal. That would be also like a real test. Can we see this through? And by the sounds of it, it will happen, including technology transfer. Then, of course, the EU-India trade agreement, the signing on the January 27th. If that happens, I think it would really be a strategic momentum. And then when I look at the long list of actionable outcomes that was at the end of the Merz trip, it was 19 declarations and then 8 more announcements. There are some more sticking points, like setting up a supply chain when it comes to semiconductors, setting up a framework for critical earth. Both of them coming together, working together. I think that are also two very important things. Now, the point is we have the document How quickly will it be executed is another question, because that was always the thing. In 75 years of diplomatic relations between Germany and India, always very steady, lots of words, perhaps not so many deeds. Out of these 27 on my list, let's see how quickly they get done. And then we can perhaps have another round of Berlin briefing.
I think, Sandra, you may have broken my rule. You've listed 27 things, not one thing. But okay, Michaela.
I will stick to one. Of course, it's all of the above. But what feels a bit more subtle, but is absolutely crucial on where India stands in relation to Germany and to Europe, will be whether it's able and willing to reduce its dependency on Russia. That is the hugest pressure point that Friedrich Merz took to India. He said he would not be pointing fingers, of course, also against the backdrops that the Europeans haven't been able to wean themselves off Russian energy so far. But that really is a litmus test in terms of whether Modi really means it to stand by an ally which is so under pressure by Russia indirectly through that war of aggression against Ukraine.
All right. But of course, as the Indians would say to you, they don't have any allies. Yeah? So this is going to be a very interesting test to see in years to come, you know, how far the Indians are prepared to dial down that relationship. Biresh, Michaela, Sandra, thank you so much. Let's wrap it up now. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, whether on YouTube or any podcast provider. Do, of course, subscribe if you're not subscribed yet. And also do check out our dw.com Berlin Briefing newsletter. That's a great wrap of events and news out of Germany that comes into your inbox every week. So check out dw.com for that. And thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you next time.